happy to take questions. Hopefully, we've demonstrated absolute transparency and clear end-to-end story from the presentations. The AGM this morning went really well. There was some great conversations, good, robust, productive conversations about the future of the game. So that's what it's designed, and it's designed such that year on year we can demonstrate the progress that we're making.
Dave, two-part question. One, how much of a concern is it that only two clubs turn a profit? And the other side of that is under your watch, under the Commission's watch, do you guarantee that none of them will fold?
I think the structural funding gap in the clubs has been there for some time, and the graph that we showed was after third-party assistance, and that's something we're very cognizant of. As you saw in the numbers of the 28 million that was distributed in 14 from the surplus, nearly half of that went to the clubs either in direct financial assistance or in support of game day. We initiated an individual planning session with each of the clubs towards the second half of last year so that we understand some of the dynamics, and then where clubs have needed direct support, because at the end of the day we need to put on 8 games of football and 16 teams as part of our contractual obligations, where we've needed to step in, Newcastle and the Titans, then we have. So I think it's part and parcel of the broader explanation that Leagues Club funding, the opportunity cost, if you like, of Leagues Club funding, I would guess, is somewhere around $30 or $40 million over the last, say, 10 years. That used to come into the game, doesn't come into the game. So it's not surprising that I think some of the clubs have found themselves in trouble. So I think it's a range of measures. We are contracted to put on 8 games of football every weekend, and there's a significant penalty if we don't. But more importantly than that, the long-term future and opportunity, as you saw, is contingent at its heart in having 16 strong clubs, and the club services unit, myself, the Commission, will work very hard to make sure that we do have long-term viability.
What's the capacity of the game to keep doing that if more clubs get into trouble?
Look, I think the balance sheet, as you saw, is so much stronger. We've put $50 million into a fund under management. We've generated a profit on top of that of $49.9 million, and then we've invested roughly half of that. I think the future is set to continue, and you saw the value of the rights is growing high single digit, arguably more than that. So I think all of the financial drivers for this game are really strong, and of course we've got a very close competition. So we're in good shape, but at its heart, the 16 clubs have to be sustainable, and we have to continue to work through with our 16 clubs to make them strong and sustainable to do what it takes, not just for this right still, but for the longer term. I think we've made good progress because there's always conditions when we step in, and the conditions are operational reform or other structural reform of the club such that they can reposition their business models, and we help them do that. So, look, it's a bit of a journey, but it's sort of crucial to the success, our long-term success, and we are way, way better than we've ever been. We are miles and miles better as a game than we've ever been in terms of the financial strength that we have as a game and our commitment to those 16 clubs.
In your opinion, can the game support more than 16 clubs?
That's one of the big questions that we're going to ask Shane Richardson to address this year. So there's 3 things that Shane will address for us, so that we will talk it through the Commission. The first one is expansion and growth, and that may or may not suggest more than 16 clubs, but it will certainly look at, with a clean sheet of paper, the footprint, the markets that we might want to operate in, how the broadcast rights overlays into those markets, the grassroots, the base, all of those sorts of things that make a successful football club, and it will come up with a set of recommendations. We'll look at a set of options. So it's a really big thing for us to address this year. We'll do 3 things this year that I'll ask Shane to do. The first is that expansion. The second is about the blueprint, the grassroots, and the competition structures, because they're crucial at so many levels, both broadcast rights but also player welfare. And then the third thing will be to look at a draft and look at the development clubs that do such a great job of providing the talent that we still see coming through. So those are the three big strategic questions that we'll ask Shane to look at, working with Todd and working across others of the game, so that as we get to the end of this year, we've got much more clarity going into the next broadcast rights, but actually taking a much longer term planning horizon as well.
So you'd like to have an answer on that by the end?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a key question, and I think, as I say, it feeds into broadcast rights, but more importantly, it feeds into keeping the momentum and the progress that we've seen across the game, and the Commission's charged me with answering those questions.
Is it necessary, though, for the game to grow at every level that there is expansion?
Look, I think we're seeing growth. If you think about nines, if you think about the World Club Challenge where we played 3 teams, if you think about our ability to aggregate audiences in the big events in 2014 and to a lesser extent 2013, you're seeing growth. We've seen growth in participation. I think the key question is the competition structure and how we consider that, where you place origin, where you don't place origin, whether the competition is 30 weeks or whether it's less than 30 weeks or more than 30 weeks. Looking at all of that, where you fit the international football, how we expand on the World Club Challenge, because that was pretty successful and our fans love to see some of the international content as well. So we're going to put all of that into the melting pot, Josh, and we're going to come up with a series of options, and then we'll overlay both the sort of welfare dimensions, the blueprint, the grassroots stuff, and the commercial dimensions, and see what the best thing is for the game. But fundamentally, we are miles and miles ahead of where we were, and we're in a great position to consider those things for the longer term future of the game, because all of the indicators are pretty positive. Not to say there's not things that need to get resolved, and there's lots of things to do better, but all of the indicators are positive that let us make those decisions, the Commission make those decisions from a very, very strong base, I suppose.
The loans you've made to the clubs, what's your view on the time frame for them to pay them back? If they can't turn a profit, how do they pay back multi-million-dollar loans?
All of the loans have been made on the basis, they're commercial loans, so they've been made on the basis of the club's ability to pay them back, and they've been made upon a foundation of a business plan. So at no point have we stepped in and just given money. At every point we've stepped in, we've helped the clubs with their business plans. We've made sure we've pressure tested those business plans to make sure that they're robust enough against the assumptions they're making, and we're monitoring every month. So it's in effect a proper loan where you've got somebody monitoring how you're going against that loan. And where we don't meet the targets that we set within the loan, then there's a conversation as to either what we're going to do differently or why. So we've certainly not just put money into things that we don't understand. In all cases, it's contingent on certain targets or change. And that's not because you're playing Big Brother. It's because ultimately we want sustainable clubs. We don't want to be club owners. That's a short-term solution at best. But we do want the clubs to go back to the community. We do need 16 strong clubs within this right still and going forward. And we do want to make sure that we've got the best possible management in those clubs, the best possible leadership for the game in those clubs going forward.
So they don't necessarily need to pay the money back, they just need to behave in a certain way.
No, absolutely pay the money back. At the end of the day, it's a commercial loan, and we've stepped in effect. We are looking at the banking facilities of the game, because the game has no debt, it has no leverage, and there's an argument to suggest that the banks are better able to provide credit. And then we guarantee the credit. So we are looking at all of those things, but at this point in time, they're commercial loans, and there's a clear expectation we're going to get paid back.
You able to explain your view on the Dragons, because the other clubs that have had money loaned, their West Tigers, Titans, their financial situation is pretty well documented. Where are the Dragons at? Why do they need that money? And why aren't you requiring boardroom restructuring, etc.?
We've been working with the Dragons for probably about 18 months, be that sort of timeline. And I think I explained on my slides this structural gap where leagues clubs over the years, where legislation's changed and demographics have changed. The Dragons are, I think, a classic case there. The leagues club was incredibly profitable and became less profitable over 5 or 6 years. And the business model didn't change. So working with Peter and the board, and we have extensively worked with Peter and the board, working through the plans and all the things that they want to achieve around membership and game day, we came up with a commercial loan that allows them to support gives them the ability to be able to do that against the conditions I've just described. They're no different. And also to get closer to their community. So all of that work took place in detail, and it was assisted by ourselves, our club services unit, and we're working through those plans, and it's going pretty well.
Can you reveal which club has that highest loan of $7.5 million?
No. And the reason I can't is because these are commercial deals, and it's commercial in confidence, and I would be breaking the law if I did that.
Is it the Broncos and the Rabbitohs, or the clubs making?
Look, I think, again, it was more illustrative in the sense of, I think, demonstrating that there are some of these structural gaps in our game than specific. Because ideally, you want clubs to be profitable and strong because you want to you want investors to be involved in the club over time. We want to bring more money into the game, not less. So it's not about high-end profitability. At the end of the day, we want to maintain competitiveness, and we want to maintain a wonderful competition. So it was more illustrative of these funding gaps, but the game is miles better than it's ever been. So I think we're more able to address what are complex issues with the clubs, with an open, clear communication lines, and the planning exercise that we started last year is the first time we've done that, and we all gain from it, and we'll do that at least once a year. The new funding model that we've put in place includes this $250,000 incentive, and the incentive is against the gross revenue. So in other words, if a club does better across game day and across membership and across all of its other income streams, it has the potential to get an extra $250,000 from the game, and that $250,000 can be reinvested into staff and people and infrastructure to be able to grow the revenues even more. Not go into the football department, go back into the club, such that you get a bit of a virtuous circle going, and the clubs get stronger. So we're working very, very closely to help with some of the sustainability points. The other thing is, I think under Suzanne, we will build a shared services model, and the opportunity there is to take some costs out of the game, so you don't get 16 clubs duplicating everything. We can build things in the centre, membership programs, HR programs, finance programs, whatever it may be, where they can leverage that and therefore reduce their costs. So I think if you take a view over time, what you hope is that gap closes. If you add on to that the fact that our financial strength grows, the balance sheet and our P&L is in very good shape, and you believe my hypothesis that rights are growing by at least 10%, then what it means is the game is going to get financially stronger than it is today. And the clubs will get financially stronger because of the work that we're doing, and we will all be in a much stronger position, particularly as we've gone through the work that I just described this year to understand the future competition structures.
John and Dave, it's been a lot of, obviously in recent years, there's been players leave the game. At the moment, we're seeing Greg Inglis talk about the game of French rugby. Greg's come out and said, I'm supporting my options and all that sort of stuff. Will you guys sit down with Greg and talk to him about his plans, and what are your plans to try and convince him to stay in the game?
I'll defer to Dave initially, thanks.
Look, I think I've read the same things as you. I haven't had a conversation with Greg. Greg's an absolute superstar, a terrific player. Last year at the Dally M's, Greg was the player behind bringing the kids from Starlight to the Dally M's. That was his initiative. We put them in a room, and they watched the Dally M's and they walked down the red carpet. That was Greg. He's a wonderful human being. He's a fantastic player. He's exactly the sort of superstars, and there are many, many, many of them in our game that we want to keep in the game. And, people will make their own decisions at the end of the day, and we saw that with Sonny Bill, and we saw that with Sam Burgess. But, these are not players that we want to keep them in the game, and, of course, we would always try and be competitive in a competitive market. And he's exactly the sort of example of an individual you would want to keep in the game.
Do you have any plans to talk to him, Dave?
Well, look, I think he's contracted till 2017. But of course I would talk to Greg. He is one of the players who I do talk to. So of course I would always talk to Greg, and he would never be somebody that we want to lose. Of course we wouldn't. Like many, many other players.
In respect to stadium, what's your view on the $600 million and how should we do that?
Look, I think Stadia is a 1 in a 50-year decision. This is a once-in-a-generation decision for all the great people that live in Sydney. And I think the decision that the government's going to have to make is about taking that 50-year view, and that's a big thing to think through, in my view. So it makes it a really important decision. I think the fact that there's been $600 million allocated to rectangular sport for the first time in I don't know however long is terrific. But actually, we need a network of stadiums that offer a contemporary experience for our fans, so that when you go there, they're the right size, they're not too big, they're not too small, they're the right size, your Wi-Fi works, you've got a roof, it's a contemporary experience. It's the wonderful experience you used to get yesteryear when you sat on the side of a hill. It's today's version of that. I went to see the Rangers, New York Rangers, over Christmas, the ice hockey in Madison Square Gardens, 25,000 people, an amazing stadium. The entertainment was fantastic. There were more kids than you could shake a stick at. It was great. And it was a great thing to watch. I've never watched ice hockey in my life, and my kids loved it, and I loved it. And if we can recreate with the wonderful atmosphere that we have across our big events, and indeed our 20,000 people events, and we can recreate in that modern, contemporary way, I think you'll see crowds grow exponentially. And the sheer excitement and enjoyment, and the way that people then spend money in the communities and in the shops and in the bars, all of those sorts of things, I think, will be dramatically better. So this isn't about stadium. This, to me, is about infrastructure, and it's a very, very big decision, and I'm very happy that we've got 600 million committed.
The Seagulls last night unveiled their plans for a state-of-the-art stadium, potentially in 10 or so years, but you are talking about a suburban ground. I know there's been a push away from that in recent years. Basically, those plans that they showed, they indicate that getting that up, the suburban ground is about the future.
I think strategically, we need, excuse me, we need a footprint of stadiums, and there's three criteria. The stadiums need to be the right size, and they need to be, as I say, modern. They need to be on transport, so you need to have it principally heavy rail. Heavy rail is the only thing that does what you need it to do in terms of not being stuck in a car park for 2 hours at the end or the beginning. So it needs to be on transport, and it needs to be in a precinct. So it needs to be in a precinct. I think modern stadiums in this day and age, right size, in a precinct with the right transport infrastructure, and then it becomes more than sport. I think Melbourne as a city has done a fabulous job, and they've done that over 25 years or however long. They've done a fabulous job, and now we're not Melbourne, but we have a wonderful harbour. We've got wonderful infrastructure. We've got a growing west. We've got a big opportunity here, I think, to set a footprint that takes care of the generations to come, and we've got to take that seriously.
John, you were very strong on player behaviour and the standards expected in the speech at the presentation. Have the events past week shaped what you said there?
Oh, clearly they have, Josh. No more so, I guess, than what we've struck in the past too. But at the end of the day, as I said, we are. If you want to look at it from a commercial point of view, the reputation of this game determines its commercial value. If you want to look at it from a personal point of view, how you behave crafts your own reputation, and that's all you're left with. So, at the moment we have a number of our players who are facing reputational damage personally, and that situation is creating reputational damage for this game. It's not where we'd want to be. So, I've asked the commission members to set the standard. And I think it's very important that we set the example, we set the standard, we create expectations, and we hold people to those expectations. So we'll just see where the particular incident that we all know we're dealing with goes to. It's not necessarily about that, it's about what happens when these sorts of things happens and all the collateral damage. And
what is the standard? Can you describe it for us?
well, in really simple terms, we published 3 years ago in the game plan a set of values which we wanted the game to share around courage, inclusiveness, teamwork and excellence. And if we did that, and we all lived up to that on a day-to-day basis, then we wouldn't be having these sorts of issues. We wouldn't have a lot of issues that we see in today's game. So I guess our foundation for how we would like to behave and like to be seen to behave is around that set of values. And we remain true to that. The Commission on its part, that's what we try to live every day. And we would like those values to be shared because we believe everyone would be a lot better off. Well, we do. We are a microcosm of society. There's no doubt about that. But our players, and I've had this discussion with players about role modelling, and are they role models or are they not role models? Whether they're comfortable with it or not, they're role models, and we have to be above it. That's the situation. So, and you've got to. It's not okay to say that because everyone else does it, you can do it. That's not the way the system should work, and it's not we as individuals should guide the way we run our own lives. So, no, we've got to be above it, and our players have got to be above it, and the pain that the individuals involved in this particular situation at the moment are going through demonstrates why you need to be above it. Sorry?
I was going to say the same question. Is the testing policy tough enough given there's a two-strike policy but no one seems to be down for the strike?
Well, Dave can talk to the detail of that, but in 12 months, this game's come a very long way in terms of its testing policies and its testing regime and the certification regime and registration regime that goes around that. We had nothing before what we've done in the last 12 months, or a little bit longer than that. So nothing's perfect, right? We're always trying to make it better, and every incident exposes something else that you need to think about in terms of what you do next, and that's life. So we're very intent on making sure that we've got an environment that protects the players and our reputation as it should do, and we will continue to fine-tune that to make it better. I don't know, but the specifics Dave can talk to about what we do, and he said a lot in the presentation today, and we can probably do more. But we're doing a lot now. We're doing a lot more now than we were 12 months ago.
John, you said before that the values were formed 3 years ago, and obviously now we're still talking about behavioural issues. What does the Commission need to do to change the behaviour? Do you need to be stronger and come down and actually punish these players a lot firmer than you've had in the past to get the change?
Look, I think we've been pretty clear about what we can accept and what we can't accept, and that will continue to be the case. But I think the question you pose is absolutely a question which is on our agenda at the moment, and that is, what do we do next in relation to creating consequences? There must be consequences. No system that you set up will work unless there are consequences for people who operate outside the system. We have a set of consequences at the moment. We've applied those as consistently as we can, given the variability of every particular situation. And I guess, the question now is, do we get harder? And if I had to make a call on the Commission's feeling, knowing them as I do, and on the management's feeling, I think you can expect us to get harder, not easier.
But you look at society, I guess, and there's people that break the law, there are penalties, you go to jail, there are really severe consequences for anyone doing that. You guys just have to accept that this will always be an issue in society and in the NRL, that players will always misbehave.
We could, but we'd rather not. I think there's a pragmatism about what you say, and that's what the consequences regime is about, because there'll always be people, for various reasons, who'll step out of line. I think our thinking is going to a sort of a different solution, and it's really been stimulated by the recent events. But we think we have to get further down the supply chain, and I say that in the kindest way in terms of players, right? But we get players coming into this game who at very young, relatively speaking, ages are asked to make major decisions about their future and are given a set of expectations which a lot of people would think are potentially unrealistic. And we don't even know enough about those individual players as to their emotional development and can they handle it. So what we have is a very broad brush approach to the way player development occurs at the moment, and we need to get much more individualistic about that, and we need to look at individuals as they come through our pathways and understand where what their emotional situation is, and understand and interpret from that what their capacity is to be able to handle the environment they're about to step into, and we need to start looking after that. So it's a huge piece of work, and that's, again, we referred to Shane coming on before, but part of that process will spill back into this whole extension of what we would call today our education and welfare environment, where we start to look earlier to get earlier development so the people who are going to be successful in our game can be successful in our game and not ruin their lives.
I'll ask two questions.
Take a visit to the Madison Square Garden, the experience of that, I don't know, was it 20, 30,000?
It's about 23, I think.
Yeah, and then some of the experiences of the majority of games that we have throughout the season in ANZ where we got 20,000 in an 80,000 seat stadium. Is that a problem for the game?
Well, I would look. What I would say is that conventional wisdom now on stadium design would suggest that you do 1.5 times your average crowd. So, I guess Madison Square Gardens did something similar. But conventional wisdom says if you're building a stadium today, you do 1.5 times your average crowd. So, what that's meant actually is that stadiums have gotten smaller because you're trying to create this atmospheric experience. And invariably, stadiums now will be in centres where people are and where shops are and where restaurants are. So I think as a planning principle, you'd do 1.5 times. Now, if you think about our game, our crowds range from, let's say, 15,000 for argument's sake, right up to currently 85,000 for the grand final. So we have to, and you get blockbuster games along the way. So our content planning needs to, the network of stadiums needs to cater for that. But when you go and watch, for me, when you go and watch a game where the stadium is full, a bit like you saw with the World Cup Challenge, there were 20,000 people in those stadiums, but there were 20,000 seat stadiums. The atmosphere is so much better than, you know, if you're forced to be in a bigger stadium with a smaller crowd. And so theoretically, if we're building if we're investing, if the government is taking this big 1 in 50 year decision, then I think we've got to be thinking about that future in that way. And ultimately, all I want to do is have a great experience myself and make sure all the fans that pay their hard-earned money have a great experience. And I think you do have a greater experience if you're in a smaller or packed stadium, whatever that size is, and you know there's lots of atmosphere. And that's what we're planning for, and that's what we would hope that the government plans for too.
Todd, hate to see you left out.
Thanks, Josh.
Can you explain, just for the record, what your conversations with Daly Cherry-Evans' management were?
It's pretty simple. Like a lot of players, they're looking for some surety about the sort of club they'll go to, and that's exactly what we gave him, that the Gold Coast Titans will be there for a long time.
Can I just ask you on the drug testing? Do you think, I know you've taken it over the independent testing because the club situation was clearly farcical. Do you think enough drug testing is being done and that they're being performed at the right times?
I think a bit to Aaron's question earlier on as well. I think there's a personal responsibility here, right, which we all have. So we can't lose sight of that because we're all grown-ups, and you take account of your own actions. And if you take account your actions and you bring your employer into disrepute, you'll be out of a job, just like me. So I think there is a personal responsibility thing here. You can't be the police. You can't sort of regulate in a way, as well as we want to do the welfare stuff that John described. Then you get to the deterrent. And in this day and age, as I know, my vast experience of the last 2 years with ASADA, testing is just one dimension. We do hundreds and hundreds of tests independently of the clubs. That's in place. It's been in place since the middle of last year, roughly. But you've also got to make sure there are other deterrents where you think you're going to get caught. If you have a drink and you drive home, you would be worried about getting stopped. You might not know where, but you'd be worried about getting stopped. And that's a deterrent that hopefully you'd be sensible, but if you're not, the deterrent's in place. Our measures have to be and are much stronger around that deterrent. So the integrity unit, in conjunction with the clubs, there are a number of things where we now register a lot more players. They're registered, and we understand that they're probity players, the people around the players, the probity checks. We've got the testing regime, which is independent of the clubs. We were the first sport in Australia to test for prescription drugs. Our blood testing, our blood passporting through the ASADA work that we did last year, again, is significant. It's sort of world class. So I think the range of things that we do is good and strong, but you've got to add it to the personal responsibility, and you've got to add it to the fact that people will, from time to time, do silly things. But our players have got to recognise, as John said, that they are wearing our brand on their shirt. And if we get it wrong, as well as the social context, because we're a big part of the community, it's the difference between a 200,000 sponsorship deal and a 100,000 sponsorship deal. Or it's the difference between your front of jersey pulling away from a club or not, or staying with the club for the long term. So there are real consequences to people not taking their personal responsibility seriously. And we as a game have to manage that risk as best we can. But fundamentally, it is about us all working together. I've come from a heavily regulated environment, and I can tell you prescriptive regulation never works because people always find a way around it. So it's got to be that mix and measure. I think as a game, as a sport, we do a lot. If we find through this, this next round that there's things we should be doing differently, then we'll change and we'll adapt. And we should be changing and adapting in the background anyway, without anybody knowing, because that'll make it even more of a deterrent.
The games that have been transparent on illicit drug testing review never release the figures, how many tests you do, how many files there are. Will you consider doing that?
Oh, look, if you follow my argument that the deterrent is broader than just testing, it's about all of these other things, then, the testing component is one part of it, and you have to look at it in the whole. I think we would compare, favourably is the wrong word, but we would compare with any other big sport in terms of the investment we put in the testing regime and in some of the other measures. But we'd be very happy to talk in more detail without betraying confidences or without giving anything away in terms of the deterrent. We'd be very happy to talk in more detail about that. We do a lot. We invest in this area a lot. It's a necessary evil in many respects, and it's a risk that's constantly changing. I think the game should be much more connected with the authorities and the surveillance that they do. We should be much more connected with other sports. We should be much more forward-looking, forward-ranging in the way we consider the risks, rather than being about the specific player. That's almost an outcome of the risks that are out there. And I think sport in general, through the authorities, through the government, should be considering these risks, because it doesn't only damage our sport, it damages everybody's trust and everybody's belief if you're not given a fair go. If you've got somebody who's cheating on the field, all of Australians, actually any community, doesn't like that. So it's a broad range of measures, and I'd be very happy to talk about that in more detail with you. I think we do as much as any other sport. Whether it's ever enough, I guess, is a big question.
Just on the player welfare and this year-long calendar they're talking about, because we've heard a few of them say that it's too much, and I know Dave said they're going to look at a complaint sheet for the next set of broadcast deals, but how are you managing it over the next few seasons?
Well, some of the analysis we've done in comparing for the last decade, players aren't playing many more games this year than they will have 10 years ago. So the volume of the games they're playing hasn't increased, but what has increased, almost doubled, is the training loads. We know that players 10 years ago trained approximately half the amount of training they're doing right now. So it's a difficult question, because ultimately we're looking to create value and always monitoring the workload of the players. So we're going to be in deep consultation with the elite players this year, talking about some of those challenges. There's a long conversation to have, and it links to everything that Shane will do in relation to the bigger picture and the footprint and the structure of the competitions.
Can I just add to that, though? The clubs have a responsibility here, and they need to exercise responsibility on behalf of their employees. So just as Dave talks about individuals taking responsibility, so do clubs. And I'm not being critical when I say that. I'm just saying that if you look to the centre all the time to fix all these things, it won't work, right? So they've got to have a regime where everyone understands what the club's responsibilities are, and they take that responsibility. So it is interesting. Last year we lost a number of players who were not fit for the Four Nations. And if you look at those players now, they've had a refresh period in there, and they are as fit as they've ever been. And that's part of duty of responsibility to themselves, club's responsibility to them. And this player education, this player welfare cycle is a joint responsibility between the player, the club and the league. And all of us have to do our job.
The clubs argue they pay their wages. How do you ask a club to rest Greg Inglis or take it easy on Greg Inglis when he's so important and paying $1 million a year?
I run a business with 1,100 people in it, and we have a shared responsibility that work-life balance is the thing we focus on most. That's the job. Because if you take the short-term approach that says we've got to have Greg Inglis to win the next 4 games, you'll ruin your long-term opportunity, which is to win the premiership. It's as simple as that.